My name's James Brazill-Boast. I work for the New South Wales Office of Environment and Heritage, and I work on the Saving Our Species program. So that's a program that was launched in 2013, which looks at strategies for securing populations in the wild of all of our threatened species. There's about 1,000 listed threatened species populations and communities in New South Wales, and so Saving Our Species looks at strategies for the best way to secure those species in the wild. So there's plants, animals, ecological communities and populations as well. And so we've spent about the last 4 years so far talking to different experts on each species and sitting down in workshops and trying to understand where do they occur, what are the threats and what are the management requirements, and how much does that all cost, and trying to take a strategic approach across all of those things to see where we should best invest the limited amount of resources to save threatened species. The most pressing conservation issues, I think generally speaking, it's about how we value biodiversity. So I think generally we need to take a bigger picture and say, well, what is biodiversity worth, and what do we want to have in 10 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, and not only what does biodiversity provide for us, which provides a lot through things like ecosystem services, but what is the intrinsic value, and thinking about that in all the decisions we make. So how much do we spend on protecting biodiversity? How do we value it? Biodiversity. How do we value it in terms of compared to other types of way we use the land? And so I think generally politicians and the community in general need to think long term about where do we want to be in the future, and how do our decisions about biodiversity affect that. And I think that really involves raising the awareness of the importance of biodiversity in the community, because if the community doesn't value it, then the politicians never will. So I've talked about saving a species, so I guess I could go back a bit. I did my PhD on Gouldian finches in the Kimberley in northwest Australia. There's a very brightly coloured, very cute little bird, and there's a lot of people that are really engaged in this species because a lot of people had it as pets or bred it in cages, and they're endangered, and they live in the Kimberley region of northwest Australia, and they nest in hollows in trees, and so I guess they're threatened by things like the changed fire regimes across the landscape. And so I did some work looking at whether there's enough hollows in trees for them to live, and putting up some nest boxes and seeing if they'd use those. I guess trying to understand whether what their life history was like, and whether they competed with other different species of finch for the hollows. And so I think it was part of a bigger question around the top end of Australia, and how things like changing fire regimes are really affecting all kinds of species that you use, particularly like the ground layer, like little finches and mammals and things. There's been a real decline, and it's quite worrying, because the Kimberley is one of those, I guess, few areas in Australia where there's not really any, too much development, but it's really the impacts of things like fire, things like cattle grazing, and things like introduced pests and cats and things. So that project, we've had lots of volunteers come up there to count the finches in the past, and also work on the nest box project. So I think there's lots of opportunities up there to get involved. There's lots of local land care groups out there doing a lot of stuff on the ground, and I guess the Gouldian finch is just a bit of a flagship species for that kind of stuff. But it's a really beautiful part of the world. I got to spend 3 years up there climbing trees, which was a really fun experience. So I would urge everyone to get up there and have a look around, and if you can help out up there while you're up there, do some bird watching, or just get involved with a group up there. It's well worthwhile, because it's a beautiful landscape.